When I was 4 years old, I was on stage and then watched them do many productions from the wings of theater productions. I think all directors should try to get a piece of theater together, even if it's a one act. It's all about, do I have a story that I am dying to tell? And if that's the case, I don't think any of the other things matter. Like, I don't have the money, I don't have the crew, I don't have. You can find all those things. Sometimes I will be hired by a studio or a show to come in and to help an actor that is having particular challenges. And unfortunately, in film and TV, directors have very little time to establish trust. When an actor is hired, the very first question I ask them is,
Welcome back to another episode of the First Act Break podcast, the show where we dive into the art and business of breaking into the entertainment industry. Today, we are chatting with a directing professor from USC, but also a director, acting coach, and so many more with his work at Sundance with multiple short films at Sundance, 3 feature films, theater, acting coach for Netflix and Sony, directing coach on many big television series. We are pleased to welcome Mr. Bradford Barnes. Thank you for joining us.
thanks for having me. This is exciting. I was looking forward to it.
Yeah, and I realized you're so humble because I didn't really know all these credits you had. It's insane.
Well, yeah, it's going back a bit now. Yeah, there. Well, as you kind of mentioned, I tend to work in a lot of different modalities and jump back and forth between different modes of directing performance. So I think that's why maybe it sounds like a lot, but it's just a lot of jumping around.
But that's such an impressive, list of projects you've done over the years. And I'd love to talk a little bit about, what was it like making your first feature film and winning an award at Sundance?
That was amazing. Just having any film premiere at a major festival is a thrill and such a privilege to have that experience. And it was especially sweet at Sundance because I had 2 shorts there. And the second of those shorts, my lead actor was the lead actor in the eventual first feature also. So it felt kind of like an evolution, and we got to make it with largely with the same team, and that was it just made it extra special to take that journey over the course of 5-6 years.
Wow, that's amazing. Was the short like a proof of concept for the feature?
It was not. It was a completely new concept. The feature turned out to be kind of very dialogue driven, kind of antic rom-commy, and the short that we made together was almost entirely silent. It was, it was shot on film. It had a very, it had a dramatic vibe. It was not aimed at comedy in any way. So those were very different projects, but
Mhm.
got to use some of the same actors and many of the same creative collaborators who helped pull the movie together.
Gotcha. I mean, I feel like after film school, a lot of people who are trying to aspire to direct professionally are trying to chase that first feature dream. So what do you
Yeah.
think, it takes nowadays to make your first feature film as someone who've made multiple in the past?
I think nowadays, I mean, you've probably heard this many times, but I think it's great that there's a democratization in terms of access to know-how and equipment. That was not the case when I was making what became The Locksmith. It was very hard to get equipment. It was very hard to understand post-production in particular. There were many kind of mysterious boxes that you couldn't just get on YouTube and learn to do something yourself or to do something inexpensively. And I think that's often the big hurdle for most young filmmakers is, yes, I have this goal, I want to make a feature. But almost always that means working in a micro budget space. And there are always certain hard costs with a feature. Certain ones never go away. But more and more, there are opportunities to do things yourself at a very high level of finish if you can make the time commitment and teach it to yourself or work with collaborators who have an interest in it. And so that has changed, and I think that's wonderful. That's certainly in the micro budget space that you can put something out with a high degree of polish without having to kill yourself trying to raise the funds to do it.
Right. I mean, what do you think is necessary to fund a feature film today?
I've seen amazing work on a shoestring, and in fact, I just made my fourth feature, um, and I'm putting it out probably in September. So I've just
Wow.
finished delivery items on that. And it was going back to my roots in that all in, I will have made that feature for half of what it cost me to do my first feature. So I went back from micro budget to ultra low budget kind of filmmaking. So,
Yeah.
I think and it was look, it's a single location movie shot in my house
Mhm.
with largely with friends. So, it's controlling the cost that you can, but I think you can do it more and more affordably. And there are many filmmakers who are much younger than me who can make it happen um, on even smaller price points because they have the time and the energy to basically learn all the elements that they need to finish a film that looks and sounds as professional as you want it to be. So yeah, I think it's a good time for that. Now with AI and where we are with technology, I'm just seeing more and more that would have blown my mind making when I was making a feature in 2010.
For sure. And I am curious though, because of how accessible everything is from at least a technical side, like you mentioned, cameras, sound, and just the availability of learning filmmaking. I think the other side of it is also that there's a lot of noise and a lot of work being put out there from all kinds of levels. And so I guess my question is, how do you make sure that your work truly stands out from the rest of the films that are on YouTube, Vimeo, and all the other platforms? Is a festival still the way to go, or how should one go about making sure that their work stands out and is seen by the right people?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I feel it too as a producer. I feel that wow, there's just so much content everywhere, and such a proliferation, um, and how do you stand out? How do you compete? How do you reach an audience? So a couple of things on that. I think yes, festivals are still a viable route. They still are arbiters of taste and innovation, and they're still a curated experience. So that's worth an avenue to pursue. Having said that, I always try to remind myself that wherever you're applying, it's just five or six people sitting in the room deciding. It's just it's taste and it's whim and it's a million things you can't game out or control, like what is the consistency of the slate before your film arrives. Do you accent or echo something else in the program? Is there a thematic push that year? What did they show the year before? Whose voice is standing out that year in the room? And so it is always a crapshoot, but that is still a viable option, and there are still very strong festivals that that can be great leg up in terms of advancing a career. Um,
Mm.
I would say outside of the festival space, there are many examples of filmmakers bypassing that altogether and still managing to, through their ability to deploy skills on social and build audiences, especially if it's a niche audience, especially if there's a thematic concern built into your screenplay that reaches a community and you can build it out that way and get it. I mean, it used to be you had to four wall actual theaters and go to towns and put up posters. I mean, now you really can reach a niche audience, but it starts with the script. And so I think that's an important element too when you're thinking about that first feature is to ask yourself, um, is this story truly mine, and does it have an audience? And I think that's often where early filmmakers get themselves tied in knots because they might be trying to game the access to festivals. In other words, that idea that what is this festival really looking for, and then trying to aim your project towards that festival,
Mm,
as opposed to say, what do I really want to make? What is unique about me as a filmmaker and my story? Even better if it reaches an audience that already has an interest in your thematic content, or an actor that you might be using, or even a location. But I think too many early filmmakers chase an idea that they somehow will crack the festival's chart, and and somehow deliver to them what they are looking for, which I think is almost always a mistake.
mm. When do you think someone's, like, ready to make their first feature film?
I think they're ready when they have a strong idea.
Mm,
I think they're ready when a filmmaker, when a storyteller has a story that has legs, and they can feel that, wow, I'm confident in this story. I don't think there's anything stopping that person except a lack of commitment or a lack of courage, in a way. I mean, it's like I've seen people get stories out against all odds. So to me, it's all about, do I have a story that I am dying to tell? And if that's the case, I don't think any of the other things matter. Like, I don't have the money, I don't have the crew, I don't have you can find all those things
mm,
almost anywhere. You'll find that community and get stuff made. So, but it does take being confident in the idea. I think there's also a related point to make, and that is, sometimes I work with directors who I sense are making a feature just to make a feature.
mm,
And I think that sometimes can be quite hard, because they'll come up against a fact at some point in the process, the
yeah,
fact that they don't love it.
right,
That
yeah,
the idea itself ran out of gas, or was written for somebody else, that they were trying to please a market or a
mm.
festival, or a demand that they believed was there.
Right. So I wonder, like, when you make a feature film, right, it does take a long time. And do you think it's similar to like making 10 short films and combining them together, or is it like a whole different thing? Like, what's the difference between making a feature film and a short film?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I do think there's not a lot of difference between making one short and then thinking about, could I make 10 of these in a row?
Mhm.
Um, you know, it, the process, once you've made a film, it is just about endurance. It's just, can I do
Mm.
this 10 more times? And the answer is almost always absolutely. So so that's not really the issue. The issue is, can the story sustain over those 10 short films?
Mm.
Is it enough of an idea to develop, and to develop in such a way that we can keep the butts in the seats? So I think it's really the idea that has to drive it. But I do
Mm.
sometimes feel, people ask me sometimes, because I still work in the short form. I love it as a form. And
Mm.
so some people say to me, it was a mistake to make 12 short films when I could have made a feature. I say, yeah, if you had the idea. If you had
Right.
the idea, then don't spend that capital, both emotional and intellectual, on all those shorts if you can make a feature. But if not, there's nothing wrong with making 12 shorts. Every single one of them is teaching you something about your process.
Right.
That's really well said. And I am curious, when did you realize that you had the idea that was right for your first feature? When you made that jump?
I had made many shorts before that. I had a script around for a very long time. The second film that I made in film school, and I went to NYU grad film school. Back then, we were forced to make a documentary in our second year, and mine was centered on an ex-con locksmith. So I found this guy who was on work release, and so during the day, he would be let out of prison, essentially, to legally help people get back into locked apartments. That's what was his job. And then he would get locked back up at night. And that was my 12-minute student doc. And some 9 years later, that became a fiction feature, using essentially that central character, but fleshing it out, and putting it in a completely different genre context. So it came from a doc idea that was really an assignment. But I found the world so rich and the potential predicament so rich that I wrote a script. And at first, it wasn't a very good fictionalized version until I really started working with my brother and also my writing partner, who was a friend from film school. And the three of us basically were able to crack what became the structure. But still, the central kernel was this ex-con locksmith that I discovered through the process of trying to find a documentary subject.
And
Hmm.
you mentioned 9 years from uh, the first short that you made and the feature. What made this particular idea, stand out among the rest? I'm sure you also have other wonderful ideas for feature films, but how should one know that that's the idea to pursue? Did that idea just whisper in your mind for a very long time? And what was that process like committing to the locksmith?
I like the word you're using. Did it whisper to you? I think that is a real thing. I think that you know most filmmakers I know have many, many, many ideas. And one of the reasons I love to work in many modalities in theater and short filmmaking and non-narrative and narrative filmmaking is because I believe that ideas need to find the right home, and certain ideas will continue to whisper to you until they find that home. And that documentary kept telling me I don't want to just be a documentary. There's more here. I just give me a chance to. And I think it also helped that I had an ongoing personal relationship with the subject of the documentary. So over years I kept going to dinner with him, and I got to see him come off work release and reintegrate into society and see what his problems were. And so I was continually being fed um, on the level of character in terms of things I could fold into the eventual narrative. But it kept whispering over time. And look, I wrote many other scripts in that time that just lost their voice, that stopped or never whispered, that just were exercises. And then I said, well, maybe they'll come back, but they're still in a drawer. And I do think the ones that want attention do whisper if you're open to it.
Right. When you say you're open to it, would you say like you should be constantly looking for these things to whisper to you, or is that something you just like passively take in as it does?
I don't know that there are ways to stimulate the whispering. I'm not.
Mm.
I haven't cracked that as a creative person. I've tried to stimulate that by, occasionally I'll go through and just re-engage with stories that are I consider dormant, that might become something. And I think there are ways to impose some discipline on it to get it to want to be more. And that does have a lot to do with just discipline. Like, let me take this old concept out for a spin and then see if something I add to it is going to create is going to catalyze it. So I think that is doable. Some of it, though, is just not controllable. You think there were projects that I never got made that I thought, gosh, this is so in my DNA. I'm never going to let go of this one. This is the baby, uh, and they just never caught fire. And I surprised myself by losing interest in it. So I think it's some go away, some come back. I think one thing that I didn't think closely enough about, maybe, I don't know. I thought about it, but not maybe with the precision I needed to, was not only where does this idea want to live? Is it a short film? Is it an experimental film? Is it a documentary? Is it a feature film? Is it a TV idea? The other question was, or should have been, what genre really does this film wish to be, or what genre can be brought to this concept that perhaps isn't? And
Mm,
that can energize a concept, but it also can help the writer in me come to grips with what's obligatory, what needs to happen for this story once you're within a genre. And I think in the early days I was very blasé and even maybe antagonistic towards genre. And I would say, well, it's going to be any genre I want it to be, or it'll find its own shape, and that'll be its own idiosyncratic genre. Yeah, I think every film does that to a degree. There's very few pure genre films, but I think in thinking in terms of genre can often energize a project or help you push it forward in ways that are exciting. And I've tried to do that more and more. And the other thing that's great, I'm sure you've heard from many of your guests, or you know yourself from your making, the the great thing about genre too is that there's more likelihood that there's an audience for it and that there's a way to market it.
Right. Wait, so in all these years of making different films and features, what were some of the ones that stood out the most to you today still, that you still think about were the most memorable?
I directed a play called Orphans
Mm.
6 years ago, which was just a very emotional experience. Because I began my journey on stage, so I was kind of acting in my parents' productions. They ran theater companies when I was a kid.
Oh, wow.
When I was 4 years old, I was on stage, and then then watched them do many productions from the wings of theater productions. So I felt when I did Orphans, and I did it in LA, and it's just a three-hander, but it was a very rewarding experience for me. And the thing I love about theater is the opportunity to sit with actors for many weeks, to have 4 weeks of rehearsal as opposed to 4 hours of rehearsal. Such
Yeah.
a and I always feel energized from it, and I always often want to use those actors then in film projects, and so that that was a big one
Mhm.
for me. The short that I mentioned to you that was almost entirely silent, the that my second short that went to Sundance, that comes back to me, and it's kind of haunting me now. And talking about whispering, that one keeps coming back,
Mhm.
both visually. I think I got a little enamored by dialogue and drifted away from my earliest impulses, which were to be almost exclusively visual, and have the sound really be score and soundtrack. And so that's where I'm looking to go next. I want to go back, so that early short that was almost entirely silent is one now that's important to me, because I want to make something next that's not so dependent on dialogue.
Right. Wow, so I wonder, directing theater versus directing for, screens. Like, what is the difference? What does it take for someone like, your students in directing practicum to direct a theater?
I've mentioned to you in class that I think all directors should try to get a piece of theater together, even if it's a one act, but even better if you can do, a full theatrical production.
Mm,
So many great plays can be done on a shoestring, and you don't need a fancy set, and all you really need is the actors in the space. Even rudimentary lighting is sufficient.
yeah.
And I just think it teaches you so much about directing actors, and about their process and how to communicate effectively and clearly. And so, yeah, I'm a big believer in it, and you forge collaborations in doing it. That's the other thing. I just did a play last year called the Molly Bloom Redux, which was we staged as a one woman show the last chapter of James Joyce's Ulysses as a monologue. It was with a woman, Laura Campbell, who's become a really close collaborator, who I'm now writing something for in my next film. So I think, I just love the cross pollination there. But I think in terms of pure directing, it's still the same job. You're still preparing in largely the same way in terms of scene analysis and understanding the text. But the great thing about directing theater is you you get to sharpen your instincts and ability to get underneath the scene and analyze it for direction, to be able to really do rigorous scene analysis on theatrical work, on plays and not screenplays, teaches you so much, because the writing is often superior. It just is. It's just much more rich
Mhm.
and challenging. and layered. And so to do that work means that when you then get hired on Law and Order, you can look at that and get underneath it in an instant because you've had the experience of taking on really tough layered material. So I think it's worth always worth doing, and not any. I feel like I just jabbed Law and Order for no reason. I mean, you know, some of the greatest playwrights America has known wrote on Law and Order. So no offense, but just what I'm saying is, you know, spend time with great writing. It'll inform you on how you take apart your own writing and any other pieces of writing that you're lucky enough to get hired to direct.
Yeah,
Totally.
and speaking of theater, when you're directing theater, it's such an immediate process with the actors. You're there with them. You don't have to really worry about, lighting or camera movement or, all these other stuff that's involved with making a film, telling a story through the film medium. So when you go back to making films after doing theater, how do you still make sure that you're also taking care of all these other elements that's involved in cinema that's not necessarily present in the theatrical medium?
Yeah, I mean, it does take a little adjustment. I mean, you said it really well. One of the things that attracts me to theater is the purity of the director-actor relationship. The fact that you can make that absolutely the most important thing. And yes, you still have to deal with a lighting plot. You still have to deal with what you're going to do with sound effects, often with music, your set, your staging, how to make that visible to your audience in a theater. Those are technical challenges, but really, those are minor in comparison to the challenges we all know when you face a big crew with a full complement of equipment and locations and all the unpredictability that goes with it. Many more problems when you're going out to shoot a film or a television show. So I like the purity of that experience and to be able to really focus on that. And I try to the best of my ability in the film and TV world to still make the actor central to my process and to still treat it almost with the sanctity that I would in a theater. Not always possible because you know you're nothing on a film and TV set as a director if not an answerer of questions, right? I mean they're just everyone is from every department is coming to you asking for you to weigh in on something, and that tends not to happen very much in theater until your tech week, and that's when it all, you know, comes together. But you have the purity of the experience of sitting with actors on a table and then on their feet for weeks before any of that hectic stuff happens, and that is really a gift, and a gift that doesn't cost too much to make happen. You know, I think in the last few productions I did, we're all in sub 90 seat theaters. So it didn't cost an enormous amount to rent out these theaters. And then we did it with bare bones sets and often with the help of film and TV professionals, production designers, people with experience in costume, etc. So I do love relying on excellent collaborators from either space and bringing them back and forth across the border of what are perceived to be divisions between dramatic expression, but I don't see it so much as a division.
Right. You know, I actually recently started taking an acting class at Howard Fine Studio, which we kind of
Oh,
talked
great.
about. It's been
Yeah.
an incredible experience. Been learning like literally so much about what an actor has to go through, and it honestly has completely changed a lot of the ways I thought of directing. You know, from an acting perspective. And recently, for our final thing, we had to do a scene from a play. And you know what I realized with that and reading that is they're very minimal stage directions. So a lot of this stuff comes from like your impulses and just what works. So I wonder, you know, when you're making a film, each scene kinda have to be the same way, and I guess, you know, during rehearsal, you kinda go through that spontaneity of things and seeing what works, but how do you translate the freedom and the how in the scene you are from rehearsal into, you know, when you're actually shooting on set?
First of all, so happy to hear that you're doing that. I just
Mm.
I can't tell you how happy that makes me to hear that, because I say it constantly to young directors, and I think many think, yeah, yeah, sure, and and don't do it. Never mind, do it at a great studio like Fine Studio. And one of the things that I think he really innovated on was, he came to LA from New York and decided, hey, I'm gonna be the guy who uses plays, and that wasn't at that time as accepted, and it was tough, and it scared a lot of actors off. And so, but I think there was real wisdom in that. And so, for all the reasons that we kind of discussed, that the richness that's there, what you can discover, what you can bring to the stage. But I believe two things about film and theater in terms of spontaneity, and I think it's the same. I remember actually Jeff Daniels talking about doing To Kill a Mockingbird on Broadway, and he was talking about the rehearsal process, and he says you just prepare and you prepare and you prepare and you prepare until you're ready to just go out there and chase your impulses, which
Mhm.
is kind of what you're saying. At a certain point, all that preparation has to be let go of, and you really just chase the impulses of the moment. And I believe that that is true of both film and TV and theater. And I think, theater artists are used to really preparing and preparing and preparing and preparing. And I think, unfortunately, except at places like the Fine Studio and other great studios around town, actors are not taught to prep as rigorously as theater artists. But when
Mm.
they do, they have a spontaneity on film. They have a, a boldness and aliveness that's remarkable, but it comes from that rigorous preparation.
Mm.
It comes from taking almost a theater mindset to say, yeah, okay, I've only got these 2 pages, but what's underneath these 2 pages? Like, what's really there? How can I activate all my own circumstances? How can I really exist in these imaginary facts?
Right.
And so, to me, it's the same. It's like prepare and prepare and prepare, and then just chase your impulses, because you can rely on that, and something magical has a chance of happening. So, to me, it's the same.
Gotcha.
That's really good advice. And I'm curious, how do you build that trust with your actors when you're directing so that when they're out there being filmed by a camera or even multiple cameras, that they have the freedom and yeah, the trust in you that so that they can really be free and rely on their instincts when there's so many people watching.
Well, it can be a terrifying job, which is why I think all directors should take acting classes, just to understand that anxiety of a crew of 60 staring at you, you know. But I think trust is actually central to the process in both theater and in film and TV. And unfortunately, in film and TV, directors have very little time to establish trust. In the theater, you have the luxury of hanging out in a theater for, so let's say you're on an accelerated rehearsal program, you still maybe get 2 weeks, right? That's incredible in terms of getting to know the person and really deeply questioning that person, really hearing about their life, about the way they approach the work, about experiences they've had on stage before, about their initial impulses about the character. And so trust gets naturally built there because you have the time. I think sometimes in film and TV, because it's so drilled into us as directors that we have no time, one of the things that we don't take the time to do is establish trust, because we're so worried about getting the day uh, and shooting all the material we need. There are strategies, though, many that I have taken from my experience in theater, but there are strategies. One is, when an actor is hired, the very first question I ask them on a Zoom or over coffee or even a phone call is, how do you best like to work? I ask them right away because I want them talking first. I want them to feel confident that they've been hired for who they are, for what contribution they can bring, for their talent.
Mhm.
And I phrase it in a positive, you know, how do you best like to work? Not, you know, what do you find to be the biggest pain about directors or anything like that? I try to, but I'm offering them the floor first. And when they're done, I'll ask a second question because my impulse is not to do that. My impulse is to say, let me tell you all the stuff I've figured out about how this movie's going to be cool. Let me tell you about the car I got you and your co-star, and let me tell you about the costume, and let me tell you about this new scene I wrote since you had the original sides, and blah 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 blah. There's going to be time for that. But I like to ask a second question beyond, how do you best like to work? And it doesn't have to be anything intellectual or mind blowing, but just, what drew you to the character? What what makes you excited about bringing this story to life? And and that alone, the beginning the conversation that way builds a tremendous amount of trust.
Mm.
And that's the kind of thing that would happen over a number of days or even weeks. You get to know people in theater. But this has to happen in film and TV right away. Zoom, phone call, coffee, boom. You might be shooting tomorrow.
Mm.
So that's the way I like to start to build the trust. And then the second way I know how to do it, is by being a good first audience for your performer. And that means being really present and seeing what they're doing, and then seeing how you can be helpful.
Mm.
What are they really doing? Do I see it? And how can I then be helpful to them to make it even better?
Mm.
And so that's also another way to build trust. So they feel seen, they feel valued, and they feel like you have their back because you're coming to them with something they can use and not something they're already doing, which I think many actors have had that experience of, you're bringing me something, but I thought I was doing that already. And that's a symptom of the fact that the director hasn't truly been really taking it in. They've been thinking, "Oh, what's my next adjustment?"
Right. When you ask your actor, like, how do you best like to work? What kind of responses are you kind of expecting them to say?
Weirdly, the most often well, I work in the indie space most of the time, and so the answer I most often hear is, "Any way you wanna work, boss."
Yeah,
Because
right.
the actor's so excited to be doing something.
Yeah.
They just so excited to be hired.
Uh-huh.
So that's the one I get most often. Although, when I have worked with very experienced actors or actors that have a certain kind of star quality, they're not bashful about telling you, "Hey, you know what? This doesn't work for me." Or, "Please don't put any intimacy on the schedule until we're 3 weeks in." Or, I know that I don't get good till take 3 or 4. I'm a little shaky on the language till then.
Mm,
I'm an old timer. Start on my scene partner, like stuff like that.
I see.
They'll tell you, and it's great, and it's gold because you've asked the question. They get to be honest with you and basically tell you, this is how to be helpful to me, or I just need 10 minutes in with my earbuds in, or
Mm.
you know, uh, please make sure that I have access to my props before my scenes. These little things that sound maybe not that important, but to that actor could be the difference between a good performance and an extraordinary performance. And you can make those things happen by just asking that question.
Gotcha. And I wonder because you talk about being an acting coach for these shows and actors, and I just wonder what is the difference between an acting coach and the director themselves? Because I feel like they're similar, but also I feel like their workflow could be also very different. So I want to kind of hear your thoughts on that.
I love it. It takes many forms.
Mm.
Um, the form that it takes most often is me working directly with an actor on a piece of material, largely behind the scenes. So
Mm.
often, I'm hired by the actor directly to prep them. Sometimes it's just to prep an audition.
Mm,
Sometimes it's prep the audition, get the role, then prep the entire shoot. Sometimes it's just SOS, like I'm having trouble on set in Scotland. Can you do a Zoom with me before I shoot this scene that I'm worried about?
mm,
And it's just a one-on-one relationship with an actor that I get to know and I understand their personal technique and I can bring freshness and a new set of eyes to the material and I can give them maybe some renewed confidence in what they're doing and some new things to think about. So that's most often the way it happens. Although sometimes I will be hired by a studio or a show to come in and to help an actor that is having particular challenges. So they might find that producers are wanting something out of an actor that they're not getting, and so they bring a coach in to work either behind the scenes or on set with that individual actor. There's one other sort of way it works least often, and that is you are brought on by the production and made available to everyone in the way that, say, it's not uncommon on television, big productions, to have a dialect coach who's there and available to every actor, you
mm.
know, who specializes in vocal training and can help them. Do I sound like I'm from Brooklyn? Okay, let's talk. The like vocal coaches are not uncommon, and so I have been brought on in that capacity as an acting coach available to all. And then you'll have actors who come only when they have a problem, and then you'll have actors who will say, "Gosh, I love that you're here. Can we offset prep, you know, all these scenes together?" And so it's really driven by who's calling and what their need is: actor, producer, studio.
Mm,
But most often it's a behind the scenes gig. It's one-on-one interactions with an actor, and it's just prepping them in the way that a really good director might. But directors, especially in TV, aren't afforded just don't have that time, and they're not afforded that much access to the actors anyway. And so the actors sometimes have to search that out. How can I get the attention I'm not going to get on set because the director's so busy trying to get that show shot?
mm. Gotcha. Wow. So much goes into that. I mean, what do you feel like are some like the biggest mistakes you're seeing with a lot of these, Hollywood level directors or or for film and TV?
I have seen directors become quite frustrated with actors for perhaps being too tied to what got them the job. So what do I mean by that? I mean, a, an actor did something in an audition, then they get to set and they're not giving anything beyond that. And the director starts to become really frustrated with that and wants more choices and wants a more flexible approach. And maybe it's fear, maybe it's because that's how they got the job. The actor seems tied to a certain choice. And instead of trying to open up a dialogue, they try to hammer an actor into submission, largely due to the fact that the director is feeling the heat and tick 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 of the production and is just trying to get this one note to land over and over and over, but is burning 6 or 8 takes doing that. Whereas they may have had more success after 3 takes of taking a walk off set with that actor and just trying to get to the root of it and and really finding an adjustment that would satisfy them both, as opposed to just I visualize this moment and I must have it and just hammer on it, hammer on it, hammer on it. And you could see, gosh, it's just it's a brick wall there. And then and that could be that I've seen that many times.
Right. Wow.
I am curious. That is such a good point, and it reminded me of what Greta Gerwig said. I think when she was directing Lady Bird, she basically said to Saoirse Ronan that like the character is yours now. I don't know anything more than what you know about her. And so, how should a director sort of chase after the opposite end of, you know, like understanding that truly this person that I've cast to play either a lead role or a side role, supporting role, that it truly is their job and that the director is just the guiding force.
Well, you just said it really wonderfully, via Greta. Like, I think so much of your job is to give the actor confidence and to let them know that they are making great progress, that they're making really good choices, and that we together are continuing to discover this character that is yours. I mean, it's you in front of the lens, it's your choices. I'm there to help you, to deepen it, to sharpen it, but ultimately it's you. And so our jobs, I think, as directors, is to keep helping that actor come to work confident that they're going to make discoveries. And I totally chime to the idea that this character is yours now, and you know more about this character than anyone else, even if I wrote the script,
Mm,
because they are absolutely the one inside the scene. You're never, as a director, inside the scene. You're still objective to the actual moment to moment work. They are subjectively moving through that scene over and over, and their body is learning things, and their subconscious mind is learning things, and they're constantly growing as the character. So yeah, I think a lot of it is giving that actor, and especially non-professional performers, courage.
mm,
It often surprises me how not very different a non-professional green performer is from a very experienced, recognizable star. They still need to know that they're on the right track, that they're being seen, that they're making discoveries, that the lens is catching. They still need that, and that, I think, really is our job. The other thing that's related to that concept that I constantly think about when I'm casting is something that Francois Truffaut said about the process of casting, and he said something akin to, I'm sure I'll murder it, but something akin to, when you're casting, you're in search of that actor who is so close to your character. What actor is going to walk through that door and be just so close to the character as written, and you're striving to find that. And then once they're cast, instead of taking that actor and trying to bring them even closer to the character, a delta that they might not be able to cross, it's wiser to try to make the character, now that they're cast, more like the actor. Move the character towards the actor.
huh,
His phrase for that was ride the horse in the direction that it's going. And I think that's the wisdom that Greta is has her finger on there. You're my actor. You're the one who's cast. Therefore, it is yours. And let's take your impulses and let's bring the character towards you. It's your knowledge, it's your experience, it's your moment to moment work that is going to make this film succeed. And so take it, run with it. I'm going to be here to create a protected space to watch you and to support it, but it's yours.
gotcha. I mean, speaking of casting, I actually, I often cast and I run into many issues where I don't know which one to pick. So there's two different scenarios. Scenario one is, let's say this role is a very unique role. It's like a serial killer, like a pervert serial killer. And there's two options. One is a friend who is an excellent actor who could totally play this role, or two, it's someone I don't know, but they're more professional than the friend. They're slightly better at acting. And a choice like this, like often, like I'm inclined to pick the friend because they're a friend and I'm more comfortable to push and explore, such a hard character to portray. But also, on the other hand, it's a better actor. So in a circumstance like this, what do you recommend?
It's a question that comes up a lot,
Yeah.
and so I hear you on that. For me, it's almost always the better actor that I gravitate towards, and better actor is a term I don't love. Instead, I prefer to think about the level of craft,
Mm,
because I think sometimes your friend might not have a lot of craft, but it might have a quality that's perfect for it. And in that case, if they have the better quality, if there's a quality of mystery and a quality of um, malfeasance or genuine menace that your friend has, that's kind of effortless, then maybe I'm not so worried about craft. Whereas, you know, an actor with a lot of craft could probably bring you more colors, but maybe I'm not completely feeling the the mystery and vitality of this particular serial killer with them. So that's to say, I most often gravitate towards craft unless there's just something about the friend that's so essential that the lens is going to capture that I feel like craft won't account for.
Mm,
But all things being equal, I'll gravitate towards craft. The reason for that is friendship is great, and I love to work with friends. But the actor with craft, I will be able to rely on in terms of getting something on our 12 day
mm.
18 that I'm not sure that the friend has the experience or training to keep bringing it.
Right.
So I don't know if that helps. The other thing
Yeah.
I do consider is if there is an imbalance in craft, and this actor is much more experienced, has a demonstrated level of craft, and this is a friend or a non-professional performer or someone I know who has a quality that I really like. Before I allow myself just to pick the actor who has the craft and experience and training, I want to research this actor and find out whether I can find out on a phone call or through other collaborators. I want to find out who this person is, because one thing that'll make me run to the friend quicker than anything is that this actor has a lot of craft, but it behaves very badly.
Mm,
And unfortunately, some actors with a tremendous amount of craft aren't the best collaborators,
right.
and they can bring energy to the set that can cause you problems that the non-professional performer would never dream of causing, because they're just someone you get along with better. So I to summarize, I always am tempted more by craft, but I want to make sure that that is someone I can collaborate with, someone who I
Mm,
feel comfortable with, and someone who I feel is governable. you know, I've had I've had great actors who have misbehaved, and I've kicked myself and thought should have gone with the friend, could have got what I needed, and not brought the added anxiety of what's this actor that I don't know going to do tomorrow, which can
right.
happen. But usually you can find that stuff out really easily to, you know, I think sometimes, I know I mentioned this to you in class, as directors, we don't talk to each other enough. That's
Mm,
a big problem. We all go off into our own little silos and until we get to direct, and then we're really verbal and connected, and then we go off and we're alone again.
mhm.
But we should be more of a community. And so when you're about to cast somebody like that, who, yeah, they might be a quote unquote better actor, just find out what kind of person they are.
Right.
Call up other directors
Mhm.
and and sometimes you can find out just by having a little telephone interview and say, talk to them about other sets they've been on. And the ones who misbehave will often betray themselves. They'll say, well, yeah, this was the worst run production I've ever been on. And let me tell you why. And the director, and you can just get a sense, oh, this might be a problem.
Gotcha. I mean, this leads perfectly into the second scenario I was gonna talk to you about, and this came up when I was casting for a previous project, and I was casting a dad that was kind of a mean dad, a very estranged father figure, and I had 2 actors. One is a guy who instantly, like, I felt like he was the mean dad because I mean, he was giving me weird vibes on the audition, like, he was literally that guy, without probably even acting. And the other one was a guy who had to act as someone who's like a mean, you know, somewhat creepy of a dad. And, in a scenario like that, right, where you're getting like those kind of bad vibes from an actor's audition, I'm assuming you'd say like to pick the one who might not exactly be that character, but could portray that character, right?
Yes, totally. I get the question, and I'm kind of laughing because I can't really say this on a podcast, but there's a very successful showrunner who made a show that we're all very aware of that was very well awarded. Um, and he has said about casting, if you need an asshole, you have to cast an asshole. He said you can't fake it. You can't. You're going to need some. You want someone who's going to be prickly. It's better to go with the actually prickly person. And this is just his philosophy, but he's had success doing it that way. And they come with all the attendant difficulty that that prickly person in life will bring to your set. Sometimes it's worth it because that essential quality is photographable and it'll be there, and it'll be there kind of effortlessly, right?
Right.
So to me, that's a liability, and you have to ask yourself, how big is the part? How important is that piece of characterization? Um, because if an actor has a lot of craft, they can be the mean dad. They can be someone who makes other people feel like dirt or guilty, or who can act with a lot of force, and so then craft supplants uh, the need for someone who's truly prickly in life or difficult. So I like to ask myself that question. You know, it's like I want I want filmmaking to be. Unfortunately, it's so hard to do, and we get to do it so seldom that I want it to be fun. I want it to be
Mm.
joyful. I want it to be loving.
Yeah.
And so while this showrunner has had a tremendous amount of success, when I hear if you need an asshole, cast an asshole, I'm always like, really? Because I know some pretty good actors who are lovely, genuine, caring human beings who can really bring it. And much of that just comes down to the fact that um, they just can't judge that character, right? They have to find a way to connect with that quote unquote bad behavior in a way that isn't judgmental. And then a great actor can get there. But it's you sometimes have to help them get past the judgment of, oh gosh, you know, I'm I'm insulting my kid. I'm physically threatening my wife, all things we would judge. But a good actor with craft and training is going to bring you that. You don't need to find that person is
Right.
my view.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think so much with what you said is that there isn't that directing community, right? We're always in our own silos. However, we hear oftentimes that to have a career in film, it's like it's a people business. You have to know the right people. And I wonder if you have any advice on like what is like networking and meeting, building these connections as a director.
I try to get out in communities of creative people as often as I can. And look, I'm a person who is guilty. I think because often my work is front facing in terms of education, or when I'm when I'm doing a seminar, or I'm also I teach a number of workshops. I I seem at times that I'm outgoing and I'm not. I retreat a lot of the time, and so I have to make myself get out more and maintain community. And I find that the best ways to do that are to get involved in workshops, whether I'm running them or joining them, join acting classes, get a band together and start an improv group, go and direct a piece of theater for no money in a disused office space. You know, those are ways to stay connected to creative individuals that cross pollinate, and it's never been the case that I haven't managed to work with someone more than once if I wanted to. It's but you gotta find opportunities to keep doing things. You won't always have the budget to go out and make a short film. So in between those times, in between features, in between uh, being hired to direct, how do you maintain those communities? And I think now more than ever, there are many ways to do it. And I think weirdly, one benefit of the pandemic, if there are any, is the fact that I can join an acting class in London if I want,
Mm,
and and I can be a part of a community, um, globally anywhere through this medium. And so, however you do it, quote unquote, getting out of the house, forging communities, um, I tend to I tend to I need to make myself do it more because my instinct is retreat to the silo, wait for the next project. But
yeah.
I every time I step out and I engage with a community, I feel enriched.
Mm,
And how could you not, right? It's just that's the fun of this business is that we all got into it for our own reasons, but it's a lifelong journey of learning from one another. And
right.
and you can only do that if you if you keep engaging with creative communities.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about it being a lifelong journey, right? But oftentimes I feel like there's moments in our life we have tremendous self-doubt or uncertainty in the industry. So what is some ways people can just keep going doing what they love, even though sometimes they might not feel like that's something they love?
Yeah, to me that kind of takes us back to the beginning. The first things we were discussing on the podcast is to me it's understanding where your ideas have a potential of thriving and diversifying your um, output of creative energy. I think to 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 remain in the silo, polishing the 16th draft of your feature screenplay, waiting for the angel investor. You could blink and it's gonna and a decade will go by. And that to me is the real danger because you're not growing, you're depending a lot on chance. um, so to ask yourself, okay, what are the ideas I have? What ideas can I make happen? What ideas can I make happen with very little money? What ideas can I make happen with my phone? You know, who's not working? Where can I draw inspiration? Like that play I directed last year, the James Joyce play. I directed because my father-in-law gave me a special illustrated copy of Ulysses, and I thought, finally, I'll actually read the damn thing. And when I got to the end, I thought of an actor I hadn't talked to in 2 years because she was the only human being I thought in the world who could do it. And I called her up, and an hour later, we had agreed to make it. And 6 weeks later, it was on um, in the Hollywood Fringe. So I think it's acting on those little creative sparks and impulses, particularly when it doesn't require a crew of 60 and a massive budget, because you're always going to be building your skill set and you're always going to be building your creative community. And that means that when that angel investor does show up, you're going to have a ready made crew. You're going to have a whole new bag of tricks. You're going to be tuned up because you've been in class with Harold Fine, because you've been taking workshops, because you've been doing improv, because you've been making, non-narrative, experiments with AI. Like all those things will inform what you eventually make when that opportunity arises, and it will arise. You just don't know when.
Right.
So the key is keep it going.
Yeah. I mean, I heard you just bring up the two letters that everyone's talking about, AI, and I wonder what's your thought on it as it impacts the industry, especially when it comes to directing?
I feel lucky given what I've seen so far that what I do, and what many directors are hired to do primarily is um, handle performance.
Mm,
I think I think performance, the moment to moment work of a live um, performer, non-professional performer or trained actor. I think that's going to be one of the last dominoes to be disrupted by technology. And so to me, there's always value in that. I mean, something as simple as, you know, how can we truly teach an AI to understand subtext? You know, that's quite a. I think it will happen. I've seen some examples of pretty good scene analysis, but by good scene analysis, I mean that the system's able to spit out what a sophomore in high school might in terms of an understanding of what's underneath a certain text, right?
Yeah.
But but an AI is never going to have had the experience of being broken up with, or the experience of finding your wife with another man, or the experience of seeing your dog run over. Like it can simulate it, but to me the visceral nitty gritty of living life that we try to help actors bring out so that the camera photographs
Mm,
that for the moment feels immune to what technology can do.
gotcha.
So I'm
Yeah.
hoping that's
And I do wonder, I mean, you've had such a wonderful career as a directing coach and like, director of so many different mediums. Why teach, students? Why continue spending time at schools and workshops? What is the drive for that?
I think what we just talked about, which is creative community.
Mm,
In my view, there's no better way to stay connected to vital creative ideas on a daily basis than to go to a campus where really smart students are spending so much of their time and energy trying to understand the form and in many cases trying to push it forward. So um, every single day I'm in a classroom, I take something away that I didn't have on the way in, and that's just where else are you going to have 18 fabulously focused and creative people talking about the subject that you love from their own particular lens and experience? That that's amazing. That's a gift. So to me, I never want to give it up. Now, it's challenging as a creative artist because you're always trying to balance, especially filmmaking. You know, I made the decision to start teaching 20 years ago, and I've never managed to make anything that I didn't have to slot on a break, either you know, uh, a winter break, a fall break, or a summer break. And that becomes another producing piece of calisthenics. How do I continue to be an effective teacher and yet make my projects slot right where they need to slot in order to my last feature? I finished my last teaching class at 5 o'clock on a Wednesday, and I was on set shooting at 7 a.m. on that Friday. So
wow.
I had one day off, and I don't recommend it. It's like that's not how you should handle pre-production. But that's the reality when you're teaching. But to me, the payoff is huge in terms of creative energy and recharge, and the fact that I get to meet people like you all, and that's a blessing. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, it's so inspiring seeing your journey because, like, I try to do my own kinds of teaching on my social media and YouTube and with this podcast as well. And a lot of times it is that balance between making my own films, outside of class and in class, but also just teaching as well. It is definitely tough trying to do both. So I really commend you for what you're doing.
I'm really glad to hear that you're doing it, and I was happy when you first brought this up to me in class, and I was just happy that you were doing it because I think this is such a resource to provide to your fellow filmmakers, and the fact that you're doing it, I know it doesn't. This is not something you can just throw together, and takes a lot of commitment to do it and to do it consistently. So I think it's great that you are, and I wish more people would.
Thank you so much. Something we do on this podcast actually is we have the previous guest leave the current guest a question. And the previous guest of this podcast asked the question, "Who is your hero?"
My impulse was just to say my dad, that everything goes back to seeing my dad on stage. His love of acting, it got me into this and is a sustaining impulse. So
Wow.
probably not super novel, but yeah, my dad.
That's so it's crazy to hear that you were literally in the industry kind of when you were 4 years of age. Like, you've been doing this really your whole life, like, acting, performance art, like, that is so awesome to hear. And, having you as my professor is just, it's so nice to hear that.
Well, thanks, and I do love it, and really, it for me, it's the fact that every semester I get to meet more students who love it as much as I do. That's the thing that always makes me feel optimistic. So much of the news right now, particularly in LA, as we all know, is doom and gloom industry wise. I take great courage from the fact that uh, we're doing something like this, and you can't fake it. You either love this work or you don't love this work. You're either really interested in the nuts and bolts or you're not. And you always can tell. You can tell the the directors who really want to know um, everything they can, and that's never going to go away. I mean, it hasn't for me. Knock on wood. But I love the fact that I've been lucky enough to keep meeting directors at all stages of their career who just have that insatiable curiosity and drive to do it because that's where the joy comes from.
Nice. Yeah. And I wonder, to close things off, what is one practical thing that our viewers can do after listening to this episode of the podcast that can help them further their careers in the film industry?
Read more scripts.
Mm,
I can't stress it enough. And back to that question you had earlier about my experience as an acting coach on set and having the opportunity to observe many very experienced directors. I'm often surprised by um, the fact that they don't necessarily have a rigorous approach to scene analysis that they can spell out, that they can have really amazing impulses and they can visualize quite effortlessly and they've got great ideas for what to do on set. But in terms of the deep substrata of what's going on under the surface of this relationship and all the things and pressures that are moving this character to this moment, in terms of really getting underneath the text, I feel like they haven't had that training, and a lot of it comes down to the fact that um, even really experienced directors haven't read widely. Like,
mm,
I mean, really widely. So to me, it's just read, 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 and it doesn't matter if it's short story, if it's a novel. I mean, probably for what we do, best to grab a screenplay or a play, but really read. It's teaching you all the things that you're not discovering in your own life about being a human being, and and you're always going to be able to draw on that. So to me, yeah, it's like you got an hour, get stuck into something that's not TikTok.
right. I mean, what are some
Yeah.
books you recommend?
Books or because
Either.
when I say read, I mean mostly like stories, like fiction, screenplays,
Mhm.
plays. So that's where I would start. But are you asking me books about craft?
How about two, like craft and also fiction and scripts you recommend to read?
I am a big fan of Billy Wilder. Those scripts are incredible. I also think you can learn a lot by looking at scripts related to the movies of Howard Hawks going way back. I find those to be really edifying. I worship the Coen brothers, so that I always think they're interesting, and there's plenty on the page. Um, it's an obvious thing, but I've always fascinated by how prose driven Tarantino is on the page. I think what Greta is doing now, like her ability to put things on the page and what she's taken from theater into screenplay writing, including interrupting characters. She's just miles ahead of most writers. So really, it's let your passion drive your reading. I'll often say to a director, who are your favorite screenwriters, and can you go deeper in their filmography? Can you look at when they have been successful in one genre but maybe less successful in another? See what they're doing, and that
Mm.
applies also to great television. And now there's such good availability. It used to be you had to go to the WGA library to read all the Sopranos, but these days you can get almost anything, and that's incredible writing. So it's really who lights you up. Another one is Lynn Ramsey. I think she's extraordinary on the page, and and how she takes it to image is kind of second to none. So yeah, read broadly, but let your passion dictate who you're reading. What do you like to watch? Um, and then on the craft level, I think there are many great books. Many you're aware of because I mentioned them in class, but I think um, for acting and directing, I think Declan Donnellan's The Actor and the Target is a great book.
Mm.
Um, it's a little scary because its examples are from Shakespeare, but the essence of it is really useful. Well, there are two directing books I think that are most lucid and useful. Alexander McKendrick's on filmmaking, uh, just extraordinary in terms of laying out preparation. And the other one is Film Directing Fundamentals by Nick Proferis, who I used to teach with at Columbia years ago. He's really smart about it too. Yeah, those are the two directing books I think that cover both scene analysis we've been talking about, but also lead to visualization, which we know is that next all important second step. Once you've got uh, the performance in hand, you got to figure out how to photograph it. And those two guys are, I think, amazing. On one last one is the directors tell the story, Rooney and Belly, that has more of a TV focus, but it's more contemporary than the other two that I mentioned. And um, two women directors who have a breadth of experience that's just clear on the page, and it's very practical. So yeah, those are texts I value.
Awesome. Well, I'll definitely add those to my reading list.
Cool.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on our show today. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Great talking with you guys.
Thank you
Yeah,
so much.
thanks for taking the time.